Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Puss N Boots, Pero's Great Adventure, brought to us by Electro Brain. Puss N Boots is a pretty simple action platformer featuring Toei Animation's mascot, Pero. He must travel through time as he's sent back in time by the evil Count Gruemon and Dr. Gari-Gari. While Puss N Boots may not be that remembered on the NES, it was good enough to be featured in an episode of Captain N, the Game Master. So here we go with Puss N Boots, Pero's Great Adventure for the NES. When you start up the game, you can either start, and there is an option to continue, but this only comes into effect if you end up game overing during your gameplay. You start off in the old Wild West, and you'll notice that Pero starts immediately on a horse, but after a few seconds will jump off. There's actually lots of different vehicles, but unfortunately we never get to actually use the horse during one of the levels. One thing you'll quickly notice about Puss N Boots is that he actually moves quicker every time you jump, so I'll be jumping a lot throughout the game. You have 3 weapons to choose from with Puss N Boots. You have the gun, the bombs, and the boomerangs, and each of the vehicles that you control throughout the game has a different item as well. All of these work pretty much the same, as bombs arc down straight to the ground, guns fire straight, and the boomerang of course does a arcing pattern that comes back. However, you can only have one boomerang on screen at one time, so if you end up missing with the boomerang, you have to wait for it to come back to you before you're able to send out another one. So it's probably the weakest of the weapons in the game. For most normal levels, I'll be using the gun, however boss battles are a lot easier by using bombs for the most part. The second level of the game has us jumping in a boat and going across the ocean. This control's a little bit different than being on land. As you can see, you only have one type of fire during this mode. You either fire straight out by just pressing the attack button, or if you hold up, you can fire straight up in the air, allowing you to hit enemies above you. And we'll be doing that to hit the pirate ship enemies that jump above us. Pretty much, we're just going to be moving forward and firing at any enemy that ends up appearing either in front of us or behind us. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to hit the pirate ships because they do jump, but just remember, of course, firing upwards, you're able to easily take them out, and it only takes 3 hits to take out the pirate ships. After we make it back to land, we make it onto this island and then jump into a submarine on the other side of the island and go underneath the water. In the submarine, once again, you only have one type of fire. Be careful of the fish enemies that come out of the ground near the very beginning. You'll soon come to a wall that won't look like you can go past it, but you'll find out by firing missiles you can destroy the top of it to get by. You'll have to do this twice in the level. At the bottom of the screen, of course, you'll notice you have your life counter, you have your score, Pero's health bar, and of course whatever the current high score in the game is, which it only takes a second or so for you to set the high score, and of course that erases every time you turn off the game. There's a couple of different items to grab throughout the game as well, as money bags increase your score, you have extra lives, which are Pero's face, and then you also have boots that you can pick up, and the boots give you brief invincibility. After the submarine, you make it to the first real boss fight. Equip the bombs and then wait for the giant robotic frog to open up its mouth and fire little frogs out. When it opens its mouth, throw bombs into its mouth in order to do damage. As you can see, below our health bar now is an enemy health bar representing, of course, the health of the boss. Once you deliver enough hits to the evil metal frog, he's destroyed and we move on to the next level of Arabia. Now in Arabia, we actually get to drive a car through this stage, and it actually can jump. Of course, jumping with the vehicle will allow us to move a little bit quicker through a lot of the areas of the game. Be careful though of the other enemies throughout this area, including the guys with the giant drills on the front of them, but you'll be able to easily jump over them and avoid them. Interesting enough, there is a giant bird enemy during this segment that will fly overhead and will try to poop on you. I don't know what it is, but for some reason there's a lot of NES games that involve birds flying overhead, dropping poop on you. After completing Arabia, we jump inside of a plane and fly up into the air. In the plane, you can actually increase or decrease your altitude. Hanging out at the top of the screen, you can actually survive the entire level without ever having to worry. However, if you hang out at the top of the screen, you will notice your health will slowly decrease sometimes. That is due to the lightning bolts that spawn from the top of the level, as these are the only things that can hit you. I've tried it multiple times and I've been able to survive the level most of the time by just hanging out at the top of the screen. You can fly over almost all the other enemies that may come at you. However, if you want to keep your health up, you may want to lower your altitude to avoid the lightning bolts at least, before then going back to the top of the screen. It's interesting to note that this is actually the second game on the NES that features Pyro. There was actually a Famicom-only game that came out in Japan that was a prequel to this game. However, this game doesn't seem to have had a Famicom release. So you have the prequel that was Japanese only, and then the sequel which was American only. The next level has us on foot inside of London, and this is the toughest level so far in the game. You have a couple of different types of enemies, as these guys will either charge straight forward at you, some of which can actually jump up in the air, so you'll have to be careful of them, as well as they sometimes will fire their guns at you. Thankfully, a well-timed bullet will easily take out any enemy that you may come across during the segment. Also, if the enemies do run into you, thankfully they just fall right off screen once they hit you once, so they don't get to stay on screen and hit you multiple times. Enter the building at the far end of the area and you'll be on a whole bunch of conveyor belts. It's pretty tough to control Pyro during these segments, but just be careful not to get hit by the giant things moving up and down from the ceiling, as well as the few enemies that scatter the conveyor belts themselves. Enter the door at the end and you'll be in another room with giant spikes coming up from the ground as well as from the ceiling. Just jump in and out between all of them and make it to the door on the next side. Here, be very careful because you have a ton of pits you can fall down into, and of course you'll end up losing a life if you fall down into the pits. Thankfully the area is short before we end up making it into the next boss fight. This giant demon statue will come to life and immediately start attacking you either with his giant sword or projectiles from his mouth. Stay on the far side of the screen and just keep jumping up and firing bombs into his mouth. He won't hit you many times with a sword from this position, and you'll be able to avoid a decent amount of the projectiles. Just keep jumping and hitting him, and you should be able to get rid of his health way before he's able to get rid of yours. For the next level, we jump into a hot air balloon and take to the skies. The hot air balloon controls a little bit weird as you'll have to consistently keep moving it up into the air, and your main threats, of course, during this segment are going to be the lightning bolts, as well as there are some other enemies that will come at you. Just like before though, placing your bullets in the right times, you'll be able to take out most of the enemies, or just go underneath the enemies as they fly overhead. While this is probably my least favorite of the vehicles, it's still interesting that they put so many vehicles in the game for you to end up controlling. And had they fleshed out the game a little bit more, the game would have actually been really interesting. When you make it to the end of the segment, you land in the hot air balloon and it's time to move on to the final level of the game, inside of New York. Now this level is a little bit of a maze as you'll have to enter the correct doors in order to move forward. Enter the first door and then start climbing up and enter the door at the top. Here, ignore the next door that you end up seeing and just keep going over to the right, avoiding the enemies, and enter the next door. Here, ignore the door at the bottom and just climb upwards. Ignore the first door that you end up seeing while climbing and head to the door in the upper right corner. Then on the next screen, continue climbing like we've been doing and you'll easily make it to another door. You'll come out just above that door with 2 more doors to choose from, and choose the door on the far left side. Jump up and climb back up to the top. You'll have 3 doors up here, but you want to choose the door in the upper right to make it to the next boss fight. This giant snake moves around the room in a circular pattern, but since he hugs the ground so low, you can keep hitting him over and over again with the gun. You just have to jump over him and run to the opposite side of the screen to avoid him running into you. Once he's taken care of, the door opens up and we move on to the final room of the game. Be careful of the fireballs spread throughout this room that end up dropping down from the ceiling, and you'll make it to the boss fight against Count Gruemon and Dr. Gari-Gari. Stay on the right side of the screen, jump in and out of their cannon fire, and just keep firing at the legs. They each have a separate health bar, but you can only take out one at a time. Take out the first one, and then the other one will become solid on screen, keep firing, and then you get your ending. Pero seemingly impales himself on the crown of the Statue of Liberty. You can actually keep firing here if you want to, and then it goes to the brief credit screen. Once you press the button here, you end up going back to the main title screen and you can start the game all over again. I have to admit that Puss N Boots Pero's Great Adventure is a game that I actually really do enjoy. I just wish there was a lot more to it. They had some neat concepts, and it would have been interesting to see if they had fleshed out the game some more to really make it an NES classic. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.